so the question on the table is, what do you see as your big purpose as an instructional designer? We're talking about instructional designers today. And so let's put it into that context. So what do you see as your big purpose? Who do you serve and why do you serve them?
Hi, Shannon. This is Lori.
Hi,
I don't
Lori.
mind kind of jumping in here. Hi, everybody. For me, and I am re-entering the instructional design field after a little bit of a break in other training and learning development areas. But for me, I'm serving my internal staff and supporting them as we're going through some reorganization and restructuring. And at the heart of my desire to be an instructional designer has always been, how do I make you more productive? How do I help you do your job? How do I take the information you need and make it digestible so that you can apply it? So at the end of the day, for me, it's all about my learner. What does my learner need and how do I make my learner successful?
Excellent. Thank you for that. Thank you for sharing. Anyone else want to contribute? Excuse me. Anyone else want to contribute? What's your big purpose for being an instructional designer in your organization or in your industry? So Jen, thank you in the chat. My purpose is to provide the most effective education to our associates so they can provide high quality, safe care to their patients and provide it in the most efficient way possible. Thank you for that. That's awesome. Anyone else? What's your big purpose?
So I work for a international financial institution that serves military
Oh, okay.
families and service members. And so we have what are called financial advisors that work obviously directly with prospective and existing current clients. So I design training or help design. I'm not obviously the only one, but help design training for these financial advisors so they can grow their business. And to me, what's more important is they can serve military families and serve the community and contribute in significant, powerful ways. And I totally agree with everyone else's comments and Shannon, your points, not that you need my validation or anything, but that I think it's, when I think of instructional design, I think of literally developing the best possible instructional materials that are appropriate to the topic, that are appropriate to the outcomes or objectives, and appropriate, and let me rephrase this, and that the media is appropriate to the medium, maybe, to best meeting those objectives, outcomes, designing the best possibilities. And overall, I think instructional design is more of an experience and a journey than it is, a one-time done and gone training. So that's my 2 cents anyway.
Well, and I appreciate that. And I believe that you're absolutely right. I don't think an instructional designer's job is ever done, is it? There's always the refresh of something. There's always the investigation of something. There's the evaluation. There is then the changes. There's always something that's happening. And there used to be a day where you could create a course as an instructional designer. You can create a course or a program, and it could sit on a shelf for a while. And those days are gone. Those days are gone. So if you aren't constantly refreshing what's sitting on your shelves today, that they are, growing digital dust bunnies, then we need to stop doing that, because information becomes antiquated so fast just because of the speed where people can find new information. So it's very easy for someone to look at a piece of content and go, wow, that's old, that's antiquated. So there's always something that is happening, right? And yes,
Yeah.
and yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, and I think it's also instructional design for me at least, is finding that middle ground between, and I know a lot of people hate this term because it's so vague and overused, but best practices or foundational core
Mhm.
principles of learning, of cognition, of design, but also working in, as you just said, these modern, I'm just gonna say the word methods for how people learn and consume information. And you said like constantly refreshing it. And I think, and I'm probably gonna mispronounce this, Fajna. Oh,
Fatina.
Fashina. Thank you. I didn't mean any disrespect there. Um, Says in the comments or writes in the comments, that it's constantly like you just said, Shannon, refreshing and updating because how we, I hate to use this word, consume or find, maybe is a better word,
Mhm.
information.
Mhm.
Like you said, there's a bunch of new different ways. And
Right.
that's where I think, finding that kind of middle ground between working in that and working in some fundamental core practices, that this is how evidence-based learning, as she said, this is how we know people learn best. And
Mhm.
it's, I think of it as my job to help them learn best
Right,
and
right.
design training, in my case, that helps them learn best. So I'll shut up now. Thank you.
That's okay. That's okay. Pop in anytime. And I think the word that you used as a replacement for best practice, I would use evidence-based practice. That's what we're striving for, right? And this is what we can prove works well, and this is evidence-based. So I appreciate that you used that term as well. So Erica, I see your hand.
Thanks, Shannon. There's so many great comments inside of the chat as well for all of us to consume. Three things that came top of mind for me is that there's been a huge shift, and I think an important shift, to recognize that the learner is in the center
Mhm.
of why we do what we do. However, we don't create training for the sake of creating training. If there's not some sort of pain point, then training shouldn't exist. So to the ideas of like training ends up becoming a default to be able to just
Mhm.
be a push of information, that's not, it's not doing then what it's supposed to do, because it's trying to get from a current state to a future state. And
Mhm.
overall, it should be about impacting behaviors that then impact the job, the company, because that's who we serve. I'm sure there's people here who might be contentious on that, and I'd love to have the offline friendly debate. But ultimately, the client is going to be our company or our organization that we work for. We want to design those. So design thinking puts the learner in the middle, though, of when we're going to construct the design of the learning.
Mhm.
And then lastly, this idea that anybody can do it. And there was a couple of comments also about how technology has made things seem like things can go quicker, and then that means that stuff can be spit out faster. I think the key element here that Fatina brought up first is this idea of evidence-based, and that somebody who says, I've been creating training for a really long time, but they haven't had the opportunity to been supported with the scaffolding of the evidence by either taking, programs that are certification programs or going into a master's program. It allows them, though, to have too much gap. They may have some really great on-the-job experience, but they still then have gaps because they haven't been able to combine that idea about, well, what is really evidence-based instructional design? And so those were those three things that came top of mind as we've been having a discussion so far.
Excellent points. Excellent points. And if we were to unpack that, there is, human-centered design, which has been a while. And I was looking on my bookshelf and I have an ATD, or back then ASTD, handbook from the 1970s sitting on my bookshelf. And one chapter within that book is human-centered design. They called it learner-centered design, if I recall. And so the concept, while we treat it as something new and eureka-like has actually been around for longer than a lot of us has been in this career. And so now it's just repackaging it, right? And also, to your point, is that as we keep learners in the center of what we do, the North Star again is the business, right? Business has business, they have business goals. They have big, hairy, audacious goals, as we talked about, on our last chat, that they need to achieve, and people need to help them get there. So we are the through point. We're the thread that pulls through, that helps people be successful, that helps business be successful. Now, here's my question to some of you out there is, some of you, which I noticed when we asked you what your titles were, said that you were instructional designer. So you are an instructional designer. Now, some instructional designers don't have control over that, right? So something gets handed down the pike. A business sponsor, several layers up, has a training request that someone has approved and someone else has looked at, and then it falls on your desk. So what are the steps that we can take? Because we can't, in some cases, you cannot go all the way back and say, well, this doesn't have anything to do with any business goal, so I'm not going to do it. What's the conversation like now?
I think that's where then a lot of us become stuck in a bad, I'm going to call echo chamber, because that's where then we can fall prey to having the external forces at work that pull us away from the foundational comprehension, understanding, and practices that we know that we're supposed to bring to the table. And yet, as much as the business is using your terminology, the North Star, it can also be the business that is usually pulling us further and further away from where, right? Until we're at the point where like, all I do is just create things that look pretty to try to communicate something that, should have been about a communication plan that should have come maybe from, marketing or comms or public relations. So I don't for any stretch of a minute or a second fall under the belief that we can stand steadfast on our Plymouth Rock and fight the forces of evil when those forces are cutting our paychecks, whether we're internal or external.
Right.
So then this becomes a very precarious dance. Absolutely. Because we can't say then no, especially if the client is going to be a high level representative. If they're telling us they think that they need training, I think maybe the best that we can do is if we have been able to do some of our own development and performance-based coaching and trying to figure out how we could try to coach them through the request to see if we can kind of evil genius to a point of like figuring out
$1 million.
Right, if this is really going to be an official training experience, or can we give them something that they think that they want to label it as a training. Okay, whatever, do I need to die on that sword? But was I able to try to provide an educational opportunity in that exchange, meeting them where they're at, trying to use their language, their terminology, not forcing mine on them, and trying to get them to see if they can move closer to some of the things that are a part of the value add that I bring to the table and why they even have me there in the first place.
Right. Thank you. And that's exactly, we can only do what we can do, but we can do it to the best of our abilities. That's what's critical, right? And so Fatna, I see your hand. What would you like to add?
So adding on to that was a great start, Erica. Thank you so much for that. From the higher education perspective, one of the things that I do is remind my faculty as I'm working with them, I am a guest on your course. You own this content, you own the experience. I'll give you the suggestions and the best practices. And if they say no, I'll say, okay, I'm still going to pin this off to the side, because 9 times out of 10, when we come back to the student evaluations and reminding them that students are their customers and seeing that feedback, then we have to revisit those suggestions and conversations. So it is challenging, it is frustrating. At the same time, part of my job is to help educate part of my clientele, which are my faculty, on these best practices, because they don't necessarily have the background necessary.
Mm-hmm. Oh, and I think that that's great. I think part of what we can do is help bring others with us. Right. And so maybe at that moment, like you said, I'm just a guest here. So maybe at that moment, it's saying, I'm here to observe and to help move things along. Although we can offer support and guidance to help, help lift as we move along. So I think that that's a wonderful point, and I appreciate that.